Hello friends, and welcome back to the third part of the air element. Have you heard about ions in the air and how they affect us mentally? Ions are electrical particles in the air. Some are charged with positive voltage and some are negative. In nature's fresh air, there is a balance between the positive and negative ions, where the number of positive ions being a bit greater than the number of negatives. Like ozone, negative ions are created by electric charge from lightning, the sun, and from the action of waterfalls. The first study on electric charge in the air conducted in the late 18th and early 19th centuries by philosophers who cherish God and the blessings of nature. Studies have clearly shown that the electricity in the air affects the growth of plants and probably animals too. Benjamin Franklin, the conductor of lightning, came to conclusions about the importance of electricity in the air. He did not know about the research of the Frenchman l'Abbé Nolte, who in 1748 found that plants placed under charged electrodes would grow faster. Also, Franklin was unaware of the finding of Reverend Gian Battista Beccaria of the University Turin, Italy, who wrote in 1775, "It is clear that nature makes extensive use of atmospheric electricity to encourage the growth of vegetation." It was not until 1890 when scientists found that electricity in the air originated in charged molecules or ions of gas. In the 1920s, scientists still knew very little about the same phenomenon, but even then they began to take seriously the philosophers who claim that electricity in the air has a vital influence to create and strengthen life. However, it was only in the 1970s that scientists actually proved that when nature or man changes the electricity in the air, life becomes unbearable and uncomfortable for all of us. As with any natural substance, air is made out of molecules. Each molecule has a nucleus which is positively charged proton surrounded by a negatively charged electron. Nature constantly strives to balance things, and even in the case of air, there are many electrons and protons, and the negative charge cancel out the positive ones. All this happens when the air molecules are in active stability. Though we cannot see molecule, scientists can actually weigh the part of the compounds in molecule. Because the electron is 1800 times lighter than proton, the electron is easier to move. When this happens, the balance is disturbed, and then the independent molecule or ion is formed. The active electricity in the air comes from those independent molecules. They either lose or gain a negative electron. If the molecule has lost its charge, it becomes positive ion. When the lost electron binds to another charged molecule, the molecule becomes a negative ion. Because the Earth is negatively charged, it tends to repel the negative ions from the surface. For that reason, Earth tends to magnetize to the surface positive ions. Therefore, in fresh air, there is a balance of ions when the ratio is 5 positives versus 4 negatives. According to science, this balance is the key to life on our planet. Scientists at the University of California tried to grow peas, lettuce, barley, and oats when the level of ions in the air was very low, and found that the growth stopped and the plants developed diseases. Scientists, on the other hand, tried to raise laboratory animals without ions in the air they breathe. Since plants are the food source for all living things, these studies have proven the ions in the air have profound importance on all life forms on the planet. Even the process known as photosynthesis, in which plants convert nitrogen into oxygen, cannot happen without ions in the air. Humans evolved in air rich in ions. Nature uses ions to develop our biological process. In Japan, Russia, Brazil, Israel, and various European countries, scientists have shown that imbalance and low level of those ions do not only adversely affect plants and laboratory animals, but also humans. It is possible to upset the balance in one direction and cause damage. However, the balance can be upset to another side and much benefit will be derived from it. There are already more than 5,000 reports from different countries and in different languages about ions in air. If we summarize those reports, we can come to one absolute conclusion. A large number of positive ions has a bad effect on us, and a large number of negative ions has good effect. Although we cause most imbalance of electrical particles in the air, nature occasionally, in some areas, interrupt the balance. Excess of positive ion can happen by friction between air layers, like friction between air and the ground, between air, sand, and dust particles that rise into the air with the wind. The same friction eliminates the negative ions and forms extra positive ions. It happens on hot days when the air has dust particles, or on days with high humidity where there is very large number of positive ions. Because the dust particles, moisture, and various pollutants in the air adhere to the negative ions and they lost their charge. However, when air fills with rain clouds that rubs against each other, they are charged with negative ions. As the clouds passes above the ground, which is charged with positive ions, a short power takes place, which are the lightning. In 1957, a student from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Israel, started a study. Dr. Felix Gad Schulman joined the research team and set up a part of the study in the gynecology department at the hospital. The highlight of the study was the effect of the hormone serotonin on pregnancy. The first finding showed that serotonin is a neurohormone that has a major effect on the nervous system in the human body and can cause significant psychological changes. Serotonin, like its well-known cousin, the neurohormone adrenaline, which responds to external pressure to allow the body and the mind dealing with them. In those years, Dr. Albert Kruger, a microbiologist at the University of California at Berkeley, was working on another study related to bacterium and its action in air. He discovered that a small number of negative ions could destroy the bacterium and remove it from the air. This discovery confirmed beyond any shadow of a doubt that the ion in the air have a physiological effect on us. Today we know that you don't get the flu outdoors in fresh air, but you get it indoors, in kindergartens, offices, schools, and shopping centers, where the air there is recycled. In 1960, Dr. Kruger published a scientific article in the well-known Journal of General Physiology, in which he stated that positive ions cause a low serotonin level, and this causes depression, anxiety, and fatigue. It's also written in the article that negative ions give a feeling of calm and eliminates the positive ion effect, which lowers the serotonin level in the midbrain. In places around the world, there is reoccurring negative phenomenon. It has a common denominator for all. In Central Europe, mainly north of the Alps, these winds called foehn. In the US, from the state of Arizona to Mexico, they are called the Santa Ana winds. In Western Canada, they are called chinooks. In the Middle East, these winds called sharab or khamsin. In northern France, these winds are called Côte d'Azur. There are common things that happens to people when those evil winds blow. During that time, there are on the rise reports of murders, suicides, attempted suicide, asthma attack, joints pain, depression, stress, and general bad feeling sensations. In Arabic-speaking countries, they are called hamsin. In Arabic, the word hamsin means 50, because between spring and autumn, there are 50 days of evil winds. In many Arab countries, the judges considered the defendants if the crime was committed on a day of Hamsin. In Israel, the wind called sharab, and it's the natural enemy of the soldiers. It is known that if a soldier is left in the desert for too long, he may develop depression, apathy, and a low level of alertness. Dr. Schulman discovered that during rainy days, people buy more shoes because their feet swell. He also noticed that during rainy days, there are more heart attacks and more road accidents. Thus, the study that Dr. Schulman began based on a list of many reported symptoms. These include aggressive behavior and physical problems. After 10 years of research, he found that most people suffering from physiological symptoms actually suffer from serotonin stimulation syndrome. He found that those victims suffer from serotonin poisoning that their bodies produce, and the results were migraines, hot flashes, restlessness, insomnia, pain in the chest, shortness of breath, aggravation of respiratory diseases, anxiety, and stress. Dr. Schulman also found that many suffer from chronic fatigue, which he says is caused by a combination of high temperature and excess of positive ions in the air. When heat waves stimulates the body to produce more adrenaline that join the hormones noradrenaline and other chemicals that the body produces. All of them help the body to produce energy to function, but when living in an area infected with evil winds, over time the body cannot produce enough adrenaline because the glands that produces the hormones are overused. The last thing Dr. Schulman found was hyperactive thyroid response, where positive ions throw the thyroids out of balance. The thyroid imbalance creates an overproduction of neurohormones, histamine, which worsen allergic reaction. In another study, Dr. Schulman took two groups of healthy men and women aged 20 to 65. One group was exposed to a large number of positive ions for 1 hour. At the end of the hour, a high level of weaknesses and nervousness was observed. In contrast, the second group was exposed to the same period of time to a high level of negative ions. A slow but stronger alpha wave was measured in them. Also, the level of alertness and test results he gave them were higher. Dr. Kruger found it difficult to convince scientists of the validity of his research. He knew it would be very difficult to prove that the heat waves, like the Santa Ana wind, were indeed harmful to men physically and mentally. He couldn't convince them because the natural condition in the laboratory could not be replicated outdoors. In recent decades, science have identified various diseases and symptoms from workplaces, especially modern offices. The EPA takes this issue seriously and recognizes indoor air pollution and its effect on us. By now, most people heard about BRI, building-related illnesses, SBS, sick building syndrome, and also SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Both the EPA and the US House of Representatives say that the problem of air pollution inside buildings is one of the most serious health issues. As a fact, they think the number one health problem is in the environment we live, play, and work. They estimate that air pollution inside buildings is 5 to 20 times higher than air pollution outside. Air pollution in buildings started in the 1970s when energy crisis began. Smaller and more economical cars were built and constructions of buildings changed. Home, offices, and schools were built more airtight. Though it saves energy, but it also caused pollution to be trapped inside the buildings. On top of that, air pollution in buildings is caused by various cleaning materials, paints, and finishing products on furniture. There are chemicals coming out of carpets, cigarette smoke, cooking and frying oils. There are always issues with mold, mildew, fungus, dust mites, viruses, bacteria, and more. When you breathe all of this dirt day after day, year after year, the body responds mainly to symptoms of allergy and other diseases caused by air you breathe most hours of the days. Although the air in buildings has enough oxygen to keep us alive, but it lacks two essential components: ozone and negative ions, which are left outside. On the other hand, the air in those buildings are saturated with positive ions, which, according to many studies, cause us quite a few health problems. Even if there are negative ions in the air that came from the outside, they immediately neutralized by positive ions and various other contaminants. Air ducts, stoves, televisions, appliances, and air dryers are among the main causes of excess positive ions indoors. The carpets are made of synthetic materials. When you step on them, it creates a positive charge. Our curtains and clothes are also mostly made of synthetic materials. That adds to the problem. In the mid-1960s, Professor Kruger conducted an experiment with funding from several federal agencies. He came to a number of further conclusions about those ions in the air. In conclusion, he said, "It is not natural to live in ions-free environment. Therefore, such a life probably does not contribute to the health of the body." Studies on the subject were also conducted in Japan. One of the studies was on 1,000 people and was conducted in a concert hall. Researchers from the Faculty of Medicine at the Imperial University in Hokkaido brought the temperature, humidity, and oxygen to an optimal level. But they could control the level of ions in the air. When the ions in the air were removed, the people began to complain of various problems, from headaches, dizziness, excessive sweating, to anxiety. In some cases, the blood pressure was lower than normal. Everyone said the air was dead. To date, a number of adverse effects have been diagnosed as a result of imbalance of ions in the air. Various headaches, dizziness, nausea, eye tremors, weaknesses, fainting, accumulation of excess water in the body, difficulty of breathing, allergies, asthma, heart and circulatory system problem, low blood pressure, slowing down in response time, hypersensitivity to pain, inflammation, bleeding, and embolism of the lungs and thrombosis. Ion imbalance also causes psychological problems like emotional imbalance, nervousness, mental fatigue, apathy, insecurity, anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Many studies have shown that some people are more sensitive to positive ions and their bodies produce more serotonin, which adversely affects them. It was not until 1975 that the World Health Organization and the World Meteorological Association decided to set up a research group to discover the effects of the weather and the environment on us. In 1976, they studied the effects on electricity in the air on humans. Since then, many drugs have entered the market for all the symptoms associated with ionic imbalance in the air. In particular, the market is dominated by antidepressants, which many suffer from. In 1995, CBS and NBC published a report where patients suffering from depression sitting in front of a small negative ion generator for less than 30 minutes. The ion treatment for anxiety and depression was better than the drug Prozac without any adverse side effects, which are common to the drug. There are two more things worth mentioning before I conclude the element of air. First, negative ions are the vehicle of oxygen in the bloodstream. With them, oxygen can move more easily into the body's cell. In addition, negative ions help the body absorb into its cells about 30% more oxygen. Second, negative ions act as a small magnets in the air and thus serve as air purifiers of nature. Any airborne particle flowing in the air and are charged with a positive electric charge, like house dust and dust mites, the negative ions will adhere to any positive charge particle and neutralize it. Then it becomes heavier than air and it falls down to the ground. That's the way nature purifies and recycles the air, and that's why the air feels cleaner and fresher in fields, close to oceans and waterfalls, and after thunderstorms. In modern Western world, there is a chronic shortage of ozone and negative ions in houses, workplaces, and malls. In our modern world, we rarely get exposed to the outdoors, except weekends and holidays. We spend most of the days in areas with recycled air. Ozone and negative ions cannot pass through walls and windows of modern buildings. Not only that, but the ventilation ducts in those buildings destroy the negative ions. That's how we breathe air with excess positive ions, which actually adversely affect our moods and health. To your attention, when I recommended to my clients about exercise and deep breathing, I always recommended to practice in parks and in the morning hours. There are two main reasons for this. And that is, number one, in the morning the air is cleaner and has less smog than in later hours. Number two, in the morning and during the day, plants produces more oxygen than in the evening and at night. For those who cannot leave the house for medical reasons, I recommend to open a window to practice deep breathing. In conclusion, nowadays we breathe air deficient in ozone and negative ions, which are essential nutrients that help nourish and cleanse the body. The quality of air we breathe can be decisive to our health, and the time to change is now. Today we have small appliances that replicate nature's way of purifying the air. Please check out the right air purifier for your indoor environment. That will be the best way to expose more Americans to the healing truth about health and longevity. Thank you, and I will see you in the next chapter. God bless you. Goodbye.